Today, we're going to be looking at a detailed examination of a profoundly tragic event, one that resonated globally and really triggered some intense legal scrutiny.
We are. We're talking about the murder of the British tourist Grace Millane in Auckland, New Zealand, back in December of 2018.
And the sources we've analyzed, they provide not just a timeline, but a really intimate look into the investigation, the legal controversies, and the lasting societal impact.
A huge impact, especially concerning the discourse on violence against women.
So our mission for you, the listener, is not simply to recount these events, but to thoroughly explore the depth of this material. We'll track the chronology of Grace's final movements, we'll dissect the evidence, and we'll really examine the challenges posed by New Zealand's name suppression laws.
And that's a huge part of this story, how those laws clashed with global media.
Exactly. And finally, we'll spend some time understanding the legal and charitable legacy that grew out of this sorrow.
I think it's important to state up front that this material, it demands a measured and a deeply sensitive approach.
Absolutely.
We have to synthesize the facts with objectivity. The core task is to understand the legal battles, that tension between the right to a fair trial and media freedom.
And the defense strategy that was used.
That too. But before we get into the facts, we really must pause and acknowledge the immense sorrow surrounding this case.
Of course.
And offer our deepest sympathies for Grace Millane and her family. Their courage throughout this entire ordeal was just, it was remarkable.
It truly was. So let's unpack the specifics, starting with Grace Millane's background and the nature of her journey.
Okay.
Grace was from Wickford in Essex, England, and she had recently graduated from the University of Lincoln.
With a degree in advertising and marketing, so she was at that classic life stage,
Right, a gap year. She was on an extensive backpacking tour, seeking adventure before starting a career.
And this wasn't her first stop.
Yeah.
She'd already spent 6 weeks traveling through South America, which really speaks to her independent and adventurous spirit.
It does. So she arrives in New Zealand on November 20th, 2018. She spends the next 10 days traveling around the Upper North Island.
Which is very common for young tourists. That kind of solo, budget-conscious travel, staying in hostels, meeting people.
Her itinerary eventually brought her to Auckland, the country's largest city, and she arrived in the Central Business District on November 30th.
And unfortunately, that independent spirit placed her directly into a perilous situation the very next evening on December 1st.
If we look at the timeline of that final night, it's incredibly detailed, isn't it?
It is. Thanks to the extensive CCTV network in Auckland CBD, investigators had a lot to work with.
So at 9 p.m., Grace was observed on Victoria Street.
Right, and then just 15 minutes later, at 9:15, camera footage captures her moving through the Sky City complex.
And this rapid tracking brings us to the most critical, final confirmed sighting.
At 9:41 p.m., she was last seen entering the City Life Hotel, which is right there on Queen Street in the CBD.
And she wasn't alone.
No. She was entering with Jesse Kempson, the man who would later be charged with her murder.
And the fact that the entire timeline, from that first street sighting to her entering the hotel, took less than an hour.
It shows you just how much evidence the investigators were able to collect almost immediately.
That window of time, less than 45 minutes, it's just chilling knowing what we know now.
It is.
And the moment when concern shifted to absolute panic for her family, that arrived just hours later on December 2, 2018.
That day was Grace Millane's 22nd birthday.
Exactly. When she failed to respond to birthday messages from her parents, it set off serious alarm bells back in the UK.
Of course. It was just profoundly out of character for her not to be in contact on a day like that, especially traveling alone.
So after 3 agonizing days of silence, on December 5th, her parents officially reported her missing to the New Zealand police.
And the initial inquiries were sobering.
What did they find?
Well, the City Life Hotel confirmed to investigators that Grace had never returned to her room to get her belongings after she entered with Kempson that night.
So that immediate unnatural absence combined with no contact on her birthday.
It swiftly elevated the inquiry from a standard missing person case to something far more serious.
It's a classic sign in these scenarios, isn't it? When someone with a known travel plan and regular communication just vanishes.
The timeline becomes everything.
So let's talk about that investigation.
The initial police statements, as you often see, were cautious. They initially suggested no evidence of foul play.
But that changed very quickly.
It did. The speed at which that assessment was overturned is really telling. It speaks to the quality of evidence they were gathering behind the scenes, especially from the hotel's CCTV.
That shift must have been incredibly rapid and traumatic for her family.
Oh, completely. As the evidence grew, the police tone shifted drastically. They confirmed that the accumulating evidence indicated she was no longer alive.
And that transformation from missing person to a full homicide inquiry was formalized on December 8th.
Barely a week after she was last seen, and most significantly on that very same day, Jessie Kempson was charged with her murder.
Charging someone before you've even located the body. That speaks volumes about the strength of their evidence.
It really does. It showed they were confident they could connect him directly to her disappearance from that hotel room.
So what happened in the immediate aftermath of that charge?
The focus immediately shifted to finding Grace. The police investigation quickly led them to the grim discovery of her remains.
The next day.
The very next day, December 9th, at around 4 p.m., her body was found off Scenic Drive in the Whitaker Ranges.
For context, that's a large, densely forested regional park area.
Right, about 19 kilometers or 12 miles west of central Auckland. The body was concealed in a suitcase and buried in a shallow grave.
Which demonstrates a calculated effort to cover it up.
A very calculated effort. The formal forensic process began immediately. A post-mortem was done on December 10th, and then specialized forensic teams went back to the site on the 11th.
During this phase, public attention really focused on two key items the police needed help tracing.
Yes, and these items reveal a lot about the scale of Kempson's attempts to cover his tracks.
The first was a shovel.
Absolutely. Police issued an urgent appeal for help locating a specific type of shovel they believed was related to the inquiry.
Clearly linked to the act of burial.
Exactly. And a shovel fitting that description was found on December 13th. The very specific nature of it suggests they had detailed information, probably from his digital footprint or tracking his movements.
And the second piece of evidence was just as critical in establishing the cover-up timeline.
The rental car.
Right.
Precisely. Police needed to trace the movements of a car he had leased between December 2nd and 3rd, in the hours immediately following the murder.
And this car was central to the disposal of her body.
It was. It was later located on December 8th in Taupo.
Which is a substantial distance away, about 275 kilometers south of Auckland.
The sheer distance he traveled speaks to that panicked but also determined effort to get the evidence as far away from the crime scene as possible.
What's so frustrating from an evidentiary standpoint is that by the time police found it, the car had already been released to someone else.
To another unsuspecting party, yes. It just illustrates how quickly Kempson tried to move the evidence trail. He was hoping the car would be washed, cleaned, and back in circulation before anyone looked for it.
That speed and distance are crucial in understanding his state of mind.
Absolutely. The cover-up was extensive, and it was rapid. Now, let's turn to the perpetrator himself, Jesse Shane Kempson.
Okay.
He was arrested at 3 p.m. on December 8th, and he was arrested while he was still staying at the City Life Hotel.
The same hotel?
The very same hotel. He was 26 years old at the time, and he appeared in court on December 10th.
Can you give us some more context on his background? Does his history offer any clues?
Well, his background is one of some instability. He grew up in the Wellington region. His parents separated when he was 9, and he was largely raised by his father and grandfather.
Outwardly, he seemed functional, though.
He did. He'd played representative softball in college. Professionally, his career was fragmented. He worked as a bartender, a builder, a laborer. He also spent a few years living in Sydney.
And the sources mentioned details about his family situation, painting a picture of someone who was a bit isolated.
That's right. He was estranged from his immediate family. And there was this specific but disputed claim from his grandfather that he'd fathered a child in Sydney.
Which other relatives denied.
They did. So it adds to this picture of a man presenting multiple, maybe even manufactured identities.
And crucially, what about his prior criminal record?
It was limited. A conviction for drunk driving, a few arrests for alcohol-related disorderly behavior. There was nothing in his official history that signaled a capacity for this kind of horrific violence.
Which is so often the case.
It is.
So this case, it almost immediately became more than just a criminal investigation. It became this major international flashpoint for legal and media conflict.
It really did. And it centered entirely on New Zealand's stringent name suppression laws.
So when Kempson first appeared in court, he was actually denied name suppression.
He was, but here's the critical procedural point. His defense team immediately filed an appeal.
And under New Zealand law, that appeal automatically triggers an interim suppression period.
Exactly, for 20 working days. The law is designed to protect the integrity of the appeal process and, crucially, to safeguard the accused's right to a fair trial.
By preventing prejudicial publicity.
Right. So, locally, within New Zealand, all media were legally prohibited from publishing his name.
But the geography of that court order ran headlong into the reality of the digital age.
That's the perfect way to put it. The New Zealand courts have no enforcement mechanism to compel international media to follow their orders.
And what we saw was this dramatic conflict, New Zealand prioritizing the fair trial right.
And international media, especially in the UK, prioritizing the right to report and freedom of the press.
And several major outlets in the UK, they just chose to publish his name almost immediately.
They did. They decided the public interest in a high-profile murder of one of their citizens outweighed the local court order. It basically made the suppression order impossible to enforce for anyone with internet access.
And the situation was made so much worse by technology itself.
By Google, of all companies, they played a significant and widely criticized role.
How so?
They included Kempson's name in an automated email newsletter sent to their New Zealand subscribers that listed trending topics.
And their justification was the number of searches.
Yeah, they claimed it was justified because an astounding 100,000 searches had already been conducted on his name within the country.
100,000 searches in a country of only 5 million people. That level of penetration meant the judicial protection was already completely compromised.
Absolutely. The fallout was immediate and intense. Justice Minister Andrew Little, the New Zealand Bar Association, they heavily criticized both the foreign media and Google.
Their core concern was that it endangered his fundamental right to an impartial jury.
Exactly. They argued that if enough people knew his identity, it would be almost impossible to seat an unbiased jury when the trial eventually happened.
So the New Zealand legal system then took action against those who breached the order locally.
Yes. They made an example of Auckland businessman Leo Malloy. The courts were signaling that while they couldn't control international media, they would prosecute breaches within their own jurisdiction.
And he was prosecuted?
He was. He pleaded guilty in June 2020 and was sentenced to 350 hours of community service and a NZ $15,000 fine. He appealed, but it was dismissed.
So for 2 years, this legal suppression remained in place, even though the name was out there globally. When was his identity finally revealed officially?
It's a long time coming. The Supreme Court of New Zealand rejected his final appeal for continued name suppression, and he was formally identified on December 22, 2020.
2 full years after the murder, and the timing of that revelation, it mattered so much.
It's incredibly important because it coincided with this devastating public disclosure that fundamentally changed the public's understanding of the man who killed Grace Millane.
What was that disclosure?
The information that was finally allowed to be published was that Kempson had already been convicted in October and November of 2020 of 9 total charges.
9 charges.
From 2 entirely independent sexual violence trials involving 2 other women.
And these charges included rape, sexual violation,
Threatening to kill and assault.
Wait, so the public only learned he was a serial sexual offender after his trial for Grace Millane's murder had concluded?
Precisely. The name suppression, designed to protect his right to a fair trial in this case, had the unintended consequence of hiding a significant ongoing pattern of violent sexual behavior from the public.
It's staggering.
This revelation, coming only after his appeals in the Millane case were exhausted, it just solidified the public perception of him as a repeat, dangerous offender and dramatically highlighted the tension in those suppression laws.
So let's get to the trial itself. It began on November 4, 2019.
Yes, at the Auckland High Court, and it ran for 3 weeks. And despite the overwhelming evidence, Kempson maintained a not guilty plea.
Based entirely on that specific, controversial defense strategy he employed.
Exactly.
Okay, let's analyze the 2 competing narratives. First, the Crown prosecution, led by Brian Dickey. What was the essence of their argument?
The Crown's argument was unequivocal. Kempson had deliberately strangled Grace Millane to death following their Tinder date. They were trying to prove intentional murder.
And the evidence of the cover-up was key to proving that intent.
Absolutely. The prosecution presented digital evidence showing that immediately after the killing, he was conducting internet searches on how to dispose of bodies.
And, disturbingly, also viewing pornography.
Yes. The Crown argued that this behavior, viewing porn, researching body disposal, cleaning the scene, driving hundreds of kilometers to bury her, It was proof that he acted calmly and calculatingly.
They described it as a labyrinth of storytelling and lies.
A phrase designed to show the jury the deliberate nature of his actions.
And the prosecution also established a pattern of behavior using witnesses.
They called 3 crucial women whom Kempson had also met through Tinder. Their testimony was vital.
Why was it so vital?
Because it directly refuted any claim that Grace might have initiated the fatal act. These women testified that Kempson engaged in masochistic and bondage sex with them, and had specifically shown an enjoyment in choking women during sex.
So they were establishing his known, consistent sexual preference for this dangerous behavior.
Suggesting he was the initiator. And the forensic evidence powerfully supported this narrative. Their expert witness, pathologist Simon Stables, testified about bruising found on Millane's body.
Consistent with being restrained and asphyxiated.
Right, suggesting violence that went beyond what could be considered, an accidental misadventure.
And they also had other contextual evidence, like the footage of him renting cleaning equipment.
Yes, security camera footage showing him renting a specialized carpet cleaning machine. It was just more proof of his meticulous efforts to erase evidence from the hotel room.
They also acknowledged her post-mortem blood alcohol concentration.
They did. It was measured at 106 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood.
It's important to note this is more than double New Zealand's legal driving limit, a fact the defense later tried to leverage.
They did.
So let's pivot to that defense argument led by Ian Brickey and Ron Mansfield. This is where the core controversy of the trial really lay.
Yes, with the deployment of the highly criticized misadventure defense, it was a difficult and deeply controversial strategy.
Their core argument was that her death wasn't murder, but
the tragic unintended result of a consensual sexual misadventure that went wrong. They claimed that Grace herself had an interest in bondage and had asked Kempson to choke her.
So they were essentially arguing that the act of strangulation was consensual, but he accidentally went too far. How did they even try to counter the Crown's forensic evidence?
They brought in their own expert witness, pathologist Fintan Garavan, to contest the Crown's autopsy. Garavan argued that the lack of classic defensive wounds was actually consistent with a consensual act that turned fatal.
Rather than an aggressive attack.
Right. They tried to sow doubt, suggesting the injuries were misinterpreted. And they also seized on the post-mortem alcohol findings.
The 106 milligram blood alcohol level. How did they use that strategically?
They leveraged it, arguing that her high level of intoxication contributed both to her diminished capacity to make sound judgments and potentially to her vulnerability and death.
By implying alcohol played a role, they were hoping to steer the jury toward a verdict of manslaughter, not murder.
Exactly. And they also had to explain away the extensive cover-up.
Which totally contradicts the story of a panicked accident.
It does. Defense lawyer Ron Mansfield argued that Kempson's lies about being wealthy stemmed from deep personal insecurity. And he argued the cover-up was simply the action of someone who panicked after a devastating unintended accident.
Trying to humanize it, disconnect it from the act of killing.
That was the goal.
So you have this clash of two very distinct narratives. Premeditated violence versus a terrible consensual accident compounded by panic and alcohol. What was the outcome?
The case went to the jury, 7 women and 5 men. Their deliberation was remarkably swift. It lasted just 5 hours.
That's incredibly fast.
It is. On November 20, 2019, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict on the charge of murder.
And the sources noted the emotional intensity of that moment.
Palpable. Some jurors were reportedly weeping as the verdict was delivered. It just underscores the profound gravity of the decision they had to make.
What was the sentence handed down?
Sentencing occurred a few months later on February 21, 2020. Kempson received the mandatory sentence for murder in New Zealand, life imprisonment.
With what non-parole period?
The judge set a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. So he has to serve at least that before he's even eligible to apply for parole. It's not a guarantee of release.
And he pursued every legal avenue to challenge it.
He did. The conviction and sentence were appealed but dismissed by the Court of Appeal in late 2020. His final resort, an appeal to the Supreme Court, was dismissed in June 2021.
And that exhausted his legal options.
It did. It's also worth noting the high cost of this extended judicial process. New Zealand taxpayers ultimately funded over $400,000 in Kempson's legal aid.
Let's talk about the public reaction and the lasting legacy of this case, because the murder of Grace Millane provoked just an unprecedented collective public reaction across New Zealand.
It really did. The nation felt this collective sense of profound responsibility and shame and sorrow that a visitor had been victimized in a country that prides itself on being safe.
And this national reaction was given a powerful official voice by the Prime Minister at the time, Jacinda Ardern.
Yes. Her public apology to the Millane family on December 10, 2018, was perhaps the most defining moment of that public reaction.
What did she say?
She publicly stated, "On behalf of New Zealand, I want to apologize. Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't."
And sources noted she appeared visibly distraught.
Close to tears. It was an official expression of national grief that really reflected what so many were feeling.
The public tributes were widespread and highly visible as well.
Indeed. In Auckland, the Sky Tower and the Harbour Bridge were lit up in a white ribbon shape, the symbol against violence towards women.
And candlelight vigils were held across the country.
All over New Zealand, yes. It showed this collective desire to process the trauma and pay tribute.
It's particularly heartbreaking that Grace's father, David Millane, who had traveled to New Zealand and spoken so bravely during the search and trial.
He died of cancer in November 2020, just before Kempson's identity was fully and finally revealed. It just adds another layer of tragedy to the family's suffering.
Beyond the grief, the extensive media coverage drew intense scrutiny and criticism.
It did, from journalists and commentators alike, centering on the concept known as missing white woman syndrome.
Can you explain that?
Journalists like Alison Mao and Paul Little critiqued the overwhelming attention this case received globally. They argued it was a clear example of this syndrome, where far more resources and media coverage are dedicated to victims who are, typically white, conventionally attractive females from middle-class backgrounds.
Their point wasn't to diminish Grace's tragedy.
Not at all. It was to highlight that crimes against women from marginalized communities often fail to get the same level of public and journalistic interest.
The case also became a flashpoint for a broader debate about violence against women in New Zealand.
It did. An editorial in the Otago Daily Times pointed out that this murder highlighted the sobering statistic that women in New Zealand were more likely to be victims of violent crimes than men, forcing the country to look inward.
And the most legally significant point of criticism was directed squarely at that defense strategy.
The rough sex defense. It drew fierce condemnation from legal experts and activists worldwide.
The Guardian's Dian Norris described it as grotesque victim blaming.
And that's because the defense attempts to shift the blame for the act of murder onto the victim's alleged sexual preferences. It transforms strangulation from intentional homicide into a tragic accident the victim somehow consented to.
It creates a very dangerous legal loophole.
A very dangerous one. And this widespread criticism directly fueled a powerful movement demanding legislative change, seeking to ban this specific defense strategy in murder trials.
Out of all this sorrow and the need for action, an enduring charitable legacy was born.
It was. Grace's mother, Gillian Millane, and her cousin, Hannah O'Callaghan, they channeled their grief into creating the Love Grace charity.
And it's focused specifically on helping women affected by domestic violence.
Yes, and their work is unique and incredibly tactile. They collect handbags and fill them with essential toiletries and small comforts.
And these are donated to victims of abuse who often flee with nothing.
Exactly, and the scope of their impact is significant. As of December 2023, they'd collected and donated over 15,600 handbags, both in the UK and internationally.
It's an incredible testament to turning personal tragedy into collective aid, and their efforts have received significant formal recognition.
They have. Both Gillian Millane and Hannah O'Callaghan were appointed Officers of the Order of the British Empire, OBEs, in the 2024 New Year Honors List for their work.
Finally, the case has really cemented its place in public memory and culture.
Absolutely. New Zealand journalist Steve Bronius covered it extensively in his award-winning book, Missing Persons. And TVNZ released a two-part documentary series in 2022.
Swipe, Match, Murder, The Disappearance of Grace Millane.
That's the one. And perhaps the most impactful recent cultural output was a documentary focused specifically on the legal fallout.
You're talking about The Lie.
I am. Released in 2024, it explicitly focused on the legal controversy surrounding the rough sex defense. The film's clear advocacy was to ban it entirely.
And it gained enormous public visibility.
It did. It became the #1 film on Netflix in New Zealand in September 2024, showing that these legal and ethical questions are still highly relevant today.
So, when we synthesize all these sources, the timeline, the forensics, the media storm, the legacy, what emerges is far more than just the narrative of a single crime.
It is. This event became a complex intersection of so many contemporary vulnerabilities. The risks of dating apps, the dangers of solo travel, the friction points in the New Zealand legal system. It forced a difficult global conversation about gender violence and accountability.
Absolutely. And the tension between a nation's judicial process, specifically name suppression, designed to protect the right to a fair trial, and the undeniable reality of globalized instantaneous information flow, that remains a fundamental, unresolved challenge.
Demonstrated so clearly by the actions of Google and international media.
It really raises a crucial question that legal thinkers worldwide are grappling with.
Hmm.
How can legal systems effectively enforce local protections and procedural fairness, like jury impartiality, when critical, often prejudicial information transcends national borders instantly and irrevocably?
Making local censorship virtually impossible.
Exactly. It's a challenge that fundamentally threatens the integrity of justice in the modern age.
Indeed. It is a question worth mulling over long after the trial is concluded and the headlines fade.
Thanks for listening.